Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. Today, we return to our Plants vs. Zombies Cross Vampire Survivors mashup in a big way, because we're making huge changes to the project. So much so that, depending on your opinion on the current project, it may change for the better, or for the worst. The last few episodes have left me with a consistent stream of questions and uncertainties. While the newest additions, such as the computer and drones, were fun, they felt like major signs that we've diverted from the original concept. It started to lose the plot of being a mashup, so we're changing that and going back to basics to pursue a true mashup concept. Because I've finally figured things out. Now all we need to do is make it a reality. But first, remember that if you enjoy the video, leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any follow-up episodes. And with that said, let's get to the Plants vs. Vampires 2.0. Now, first and foremost, I wasn't kidding about the redo. About 60 to 70% of the original code has been gutted or rewritten. Our enemies, projectiles, plant data, and plant functionality remain intact, but just about everything else was redone. So now both the placement and removal of plants from the game world function based on array data. One of the biggest changes was almost a complete removal of data structure usage, which will hopefully help with performance. Much like before, we still have two lists, one for seeds and one for plants. As such, we now have functions to add, remove, and find entries within these lists for other functionality. We also have an updated yet still basic evolution check for plant placement, and a nuke plant function that will automatically remove any and all data pertaining to the target plant. And our new plant placement code is much cleaner, but just as efficient as the previous version. Again, this time using arrays instead of a DS grid or DS lists. Moving on to the ticker, this is where things start to really change. So let's skip down to the enemy behavior first. Enemies will no longer target plants. Unless under the influence of the Hypno Shroom, the enemy will now always target the player. And balloon variants will automatically switch to ground variants once within a certain range of the player. And since our player is still invulnerable, we'll have to come back later to code the rest. Next are the controls. Again, everything's been simplified and improved. The player is only ever in control of their inventory, so placement works just as it did before, just perhaps with a little more efficiency. And so finally, let's talk about the plants. First, most plants are capable of facing any direction and will now automatically target the nearest enemy to their position. Next, a lot of plants work as they used to and have been updated to work with the new functions and systems. This is temporary, however, as we look at the new updated sunflower code. Instead of producing sun over time, they now suck nearby sun towards their position. And if you caught it earlier, the enemies now actually drop sun when they are defeated. So looking at our new and updated HUD, you may be able to figure out the approach that we'll be going with. But just so we're all on the same page, allow me to explain the gameplay for this new version. Like in Vampire Survivors, the player starts with one plant type. This plant can be placed and will fight for the player as they're chased by the hordes of bloodthirsty enemies. As enemies are defeated, sun orbs are dropped, and that sun works like the experience in Vampire Survivors. Leveling up will prompt the opportunity to purchase new plants with a cap of 6 offensive plants per run. The overall goal is to turn Plants vs. Zombies roster of vegetation into 2 camps, offensive and defensive. For example, sunflowers and pea shooters are considered offensive units, and as such will exist in the world. Other plants such as doom shrooms and possibly explosive plants will act as defensive plants, acting on the player's position rather than a permanent space within the world. Perhaps offensive and defensive are the wrong terms to use. Maybe primary and secondary? Offensive and supportive? Generally speaking, the player's role is to be both the bait and the support role for their plants. Now, there are still definitely details to be hashed out, like how should evolutions be handled? Does the Vampire Survivors EXP system work in this scenario, or are we going to have to tweak things? I'm honestly not sure at the time that I'm recording this. We'll likely deal with that once we get there. For the time being, and likely the next episode or two, I'm going to be focusing on figuring out ways to reinterpret Plants vs. Zombies roster into Vampire Survivors like items and weapons. Unfortunately, gutting everything and all the rewrites dominated most of my time this session, so we'll have to wait to see what happens next. But I think that this approach works far better as an actual mashup than the previous concept. which I should note isn't completely lost. The ideas weren't bad and will likely be used in something else down the line. It just didn't mesh with a Plants vs. Zombies cross Vampire Survivors mashup. But that's just what I think. I'd love to know if you agree or disagree with this new direction. So be sure to leave any and all thoughts on the project in the comments. And a quick reminder that if you enjoy the content and would like to support its continued creation, then consider subscribing to my Patreon. But with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.